This is the biggest day of my life! This kid just stole something from the worst villains in the world!
Vincere su questa colpevolezza.
From the latest animated antics of the Minions to one of cinema's most iconic composers, welcome to this week's show dedicated to film. Our critic Lisa Nesselson joins me to talk about this week's new releases. Hello, Lisa.
Hi, Alison.
And Lisa, we're starting with animated feature Minions 2, The Rise of Gru. Now, it's hard to believe that anything could slow the Minions down, but this movie was delayed twice due to the pandemic. Was it worth the wait?
Well, you know, this delightful romp is set in the 1970s, so strictly speaking, it was never time-sensitive for theaters. And to answer your question, these impartial young critics join me in saying that it was definitely worth the wait, right? Okay. We meet Gru, the villain in the Despicable Me movies, when he's an adolescent in San Francisco and dreaming of growing up to be a villain. It's good to have goals and to set out to achieve them when you're young. Gru is 11, going on 12. Like any self-respecting villain in training, Gru needs henchmen. What he gets are minions. Minions speak in a jaunty gibberish voiced by one of the series co-creators, Pierre Coffin, with what can only be saluted as unbridled, hilarious panache. Gru, voiced as before by Steve Carell, speaks with an Italian accent, and so do the minions this time around. There's also a new addition to the central trio of Kevin Stewart and Bob. Otto wears braces and delivers lengthy speeches that I think are an excellent example of how a foreign language enters our brains before we begin to comprehend it. The only skill anybody needs to enjoy this movie is a sense of humor. And I'll use mine to point out that since the right to laugh at clever animated films is not, alas, enshrined in the U.S. Constitution, I think it would be a good precaution to rush out and see it immediately.
It is a worrying world we're living in, Lisa. All right, let's distract ourselves from the news with a look at the animated antics of the Minions.
Otto, where's the stone?
Big Astoria! Porca li tondruf, quando le pari mene! Ilmako, vai chiberga! La papitoirelle! Oh no! La partida! La vola! Basta, il amico! Non le posso stoppare! Bahiu, la ghetta! Papagato, parenti! E là, la punella! Oh là là, le pelo bellissimo! La chiruto! Topissimo, no?
Now, this is the best kind of family entertainment in that there are silly jokes aimed at kids, and there are also silly jokes aimed at grown-ups, especially baby boomers. The musical cues are very funny, as you can see there, and as is having cast Julie Andrews as Gru's mom and Alan Arkin as the voice of aging bad guy and Gru role model, Wild Knuckles. Now, the group of evildoers Gru auditions to join is an excellent excuse to display really bad puns. The only woman in the gang is Afro-sporting Belle Bottom, get it? And another character has a giant, scary lobster claw, and his name is Jean-Claude. And he's voiced by none other than Jean-Claude Van Damme. And kids, you can argue with your French class teacher that watching a Minions movie qualifies as doing your homework because the animation studio doing most of the work with these characters is French. Sit through the closing credits and you'll see a seemingly endless abundance of French names.
And it's so funny, they gave them Italian accents this time. All right, we're going to move from the Italian accented Minions to one of the greatest Italian composers of all time, Ennio Morricone. His fellow countryman Giuseppe Tornatore has directed a documentary about him. Ennio Morricone wrote the score for Tornatore's Cinema Paradiso and countless other films. Lisa, tell us about Ennio.
Well, you know, history is full of famous and not at all famous creative people who wanted to be actors or musicians or artists, only to have their parents object and say they must pursue a real profession like doctor or lawyer. Well, as a boy, Ennio Morricone wanted to be a doctor, and his father, a professional trumpeter, said, not so fast. I insist that you be a musician. So we have Ennio's dad to thank for iconic film score after iconic film score. Morricone, who died 2 years ago at age 91, was insanely prolific, about 400 film scores. If you have functioning eardrums, it is a near mathematical certainty that you have heard at least some of his compositions. His pan flute notes for Sergio Leone's so-called spaghetti westerns, his soaring score for The Mission, the Sacco and Vanzetti theme song that Joan Baez turned into an anthem. It's hard to imagine a world without them. The film is 156 minutes long, anchored by an interview with the maestro himself, filmed shortly before his death, and it's an affectionate, incredibly well-documented account of a created life.
All right, well, let's get a taste of the man, the music, and the admirers in Ennio.
Quando ho fatto il primo film, era il 61, ho detto, nel 1970 smetto di fare il cinema.
Bronzatissima.
Colorava queste canzoni, le faceva diventare un'altra cosa.
Il leone disse, io quel flauto di panna lo vorrei a tappeto sul film. Morricone disse, non si può mettere il flauto di panna su tutto.
It is such great music, and Lisa, directors were really honored when he agreed to score one of their films.
His music added so much to so many already good movies. The Battle of Algiers, 1900, Days of Heaven, Once Upon a Time in America. If I started dropping names that appear in this doc, people talking about him, the floor would be littered with them. Especially fun are the passages about Morricone's innovations as an arranger for Italian pop music in the 1950s and 60s, before he at first reluctantly began working in film. And he says he's not a big fan of melody, which is baffling since he managed to compose an awful lot of truly memorable melodies.
So true. All right, so Lisa, this next film is from writer and director Hainer Salim. He was born in Iraqi Kurdistan, but he left at age 17 and has been living in France for decades now. He has a new film in French theaters. Tell us about Goodnight Soldier.
Well, Salim exceeds at coming up with stories set in places that don't generally get that much big screen attention. Salim's first feature back in 1997, Vive la mariée et la libération du Kurdistan, stars Georges Gorafas as a Kurdish refugee in Paris, intent on finding a patriotic Kurdish virgin to be his wife. Vodka Lemon in 2003 was set in a Yazidi village in Armenia with scant economic prospects after the collapse of the Soviet Union. In 2013, My Sweet Pepperland gave Goldshifteh Farhadi a chance to show off her wry charisma as a teacher in a remote village in Iraqi Kurdistan. His latest film, Goodnight Soldier, is set in Iraqi Kurdistan too, but the main protagonists come from very well-off backgrounds and live in large, elegant houses in the middle of nowhere. Zina and Avdal are madly in love. Unfortunately, their parents, or at least their respective fathers, devote much of their energy to perpetuating an ancestral feud, insulting each other, and telling their only kids that marriage will be over their dead bodies. Avdal is a Kurdish freedom fighter, and he and Zina enjoy pretty hot premarital sex whenever he's home on leave. After their parents miraculously reconcile and they finally wed, a major obstacle to their future happiness appears.
All right, well, let's take a look at the striking settings and the dilemmas of Goodnight Soldier.
خازم بزوجين
تو نتنی ولی گرم بکشی
بیجا کره خو بلا خوش کتام واکن شیطان سویت بن کشیش بس اصلشم عشق و ظلامه که من حکم روشنه مانه وقت این هر تو موفق به مانه؟
Now, the underlying themes here are fascinating. Traditions are gradually getting chipped away at by the younger generations. Avdal wants to give his wife boundless sexual pleasure and raise a family with her. Unlike with many of the director's prior films, money is no object. But after Avdal is wounded in combat, those dreams are severely compromised. Just what constitutes virility, and how much can love alone bridge seemingly insurmountable problems? The performances are earnest, and the themes really pertinent, yet there's something about the overall tone that doesn't always work, but it is definitely interesting to observe that Avdal could get out of military service and instead proudly pursues it, and that Zina could stay home and live a pampered life, but she prefers to get a job at an oil refinery.
It seems like it has some pretty steamy, good scenes as well, Lisa. Finally, from you, we're going to end with a retrospective of British films that's underway at the Cinémathèque Française here in Paris. It runs through July 11th, and it is called British Noir.
Right, that would be noir as in film noir, the widely used French term for movies with dark themes where people are up to no good, often but not always in stylish black and white. This is a terrific lineup of British movies from well-known classics to lesser-known gems featuring familiar faces like Michael Caine or Dirk Bogarde or Bob Hoskins, as well as striking character actors portraying criminals. And while most of us wish to steer clear of criminals in real life, they tend to be quite fun to watch on screen. Be on the lookout for Hell Drivers from the 1950s, The Craze, and Alfred Hitchcock's Frenzy. Hollywood made plenty of gangster movies, but some scholars would argue that the British variety were more amoral, often more political, and possibly harsher. The Cinematheque's programmers rounded up these films from archives all over the world, and I presume they're planning to give them back.
Hopefully we get to watch them first. Lisa Nesselson, thank you so much, as always. Thanks to all of you for watching. We'll leave you with a glimpse of the eerie range of titles from the British Noir retrospective at the French Cinematheque. For more culture news, you can always head to our website or find us on social media, and there is more news coming up on France 24 after this.